everybody, and welcome to Bingefest. I'm Vinnie Civitillo.
And I'm Kay Conroy.
This is a brand new podcast where we're going to be binging a season or two of TV every episode and discussing it. You'll be able to get this anywhere you can get a podcast. That's iTunes, Spotify, etc., etc., etc. But please don't forget to engage. Write that 5-star review, like it, comment on it. Let Google's algorithm know you're out there so the show gets put in front of more awesome people just like you.
We appreciate it, and we will see you here every other week.
So here we are.
Here we are.
It feels like both a long time coming and the natural progression of what always should have been.
Yeah, if you're new to the Vinnie and Kate podcasting thing, this is the spiritual successor to the podcast that we did for work, Other People's Business. We did that for 6 years, and a portion of that show was spent talking about television. Now we're going to really take that and extrapolate it out and do a whole show on just that. So, Kate, I'm going to let you get started here.
All right. So one of my favorite things about Other People's Business was at the very beginning, the icebreaker, what are you currently binging? So I am going to insist that we continue that question, even though it's just you and I.
Right, because I was going to say the whole point of that was getting an icebreaker with the guest. But since there's no guest, that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But, what are you currently binging?
All right. Well, so I have been sick for the last week, and I've been binging a show that I used to love a lot, Good Bones on HBO. It's like an HGTV show, which is very outside. But I think because I was sick, I didn't want to have to follow plot lines. I didn't want to have to think too hard. It was just every episode, they buy a rundown, crappy house, and they make it beautiful, and they show it off to people, and then they sell it.
So this is like a reality show, or this is a fictional show about people who do that?
No, I guess it's a reality show.
Although, I mean, keeping in mind that all reality shows about these houses are totally fictional.
So I'm learning that. So
yeah.
You're 100%. When I think of reality shows, I think of the Kardashians or
which is probably also totally fictional, but
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. So anyway, but this was it's a home improvement-ish show. And I just bought a house and I'm rehabbing it. And so it was sort of on my mind to revisit some of these cool things. And I only got to season 4 out of 8. And one of the main characters is always wearing these t-shirts that say addicted to kindness or human AF or whatever. So the persona that she's trying to project is one of peace, love, kindness, blah, blah, blah. And she's one of the meanest people I've ever seen on TV. She's just, picking at people and making fun of people and pranking people and good-naturedly, of course. But I don't know that I would want to work for her.
Sure.
So anyway, I was binging Good Bones, which is an HGTV. It lives currently on HBO. And now that I'm feeling better, I don't know that I'll ever go back to it. I don't need to. If you've seen one show, you've seen them all,
Yeah, I don't want to name names or name shows because I have no idea how litigious they are about this kind of stuff. But right. I have, two of my friends were on a very popular, house getting show. And
really?
They viewed 3 houses or something. I don't remember how many houses there were, but at the end of the episode, they picked their house. And when I say they picked their house, I mean they picked the house that they had already purchased and had been living in for some time before this show. So when we say they are fictional, that's what I mean.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I have no words. That's amazing.
Yeah, so just know that none of these things it's all just entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're sick on the couch and you have a good time looking at these shows about people who go into houses and pick them apart. And I always love when they're like, so and so is a journalist making $26,000 a year. And they're like, well, wait a minute, but we have to have an indoor pool.
His budget is $1.2 million.
Yeah, exactly. And the wife is always like, no, I need this.
I need a closet that is 10 by 10. I need it. I need a 10 by 10 closet.
10 by 10 is sort of the minimum. My dorm room in college was like 10 by 15.
I
It
know.
needs to be like 20 by 20.
Yeah.
So
What
what
are
have
you
I been
binging?
binging? I've been binging actually I've been picking up the Evil Dead movies on 4K Blu-ray, and I've been binging them in the order that they came in. I just finished the
Wow.
last of them, and so I've been considering going back and rewatching the TV show because it's been enough time since Ash versus Evil Dead was on that I mean I kind of remember the broad strokes and I remember how it ends, but very little in between.
Bruce Campbell's a national treasure. I think anything he
Yes.
does, um, I'm on board for. Except for scary mofos like those. I don't watch those at all.
Some of them are scarier than others. Like I think you wouldn't
You're
find
right.
Army of Darkness scary. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I
Um,
have once in college. Give me some
yeah,
sugar baby is
yeah,
the
exactly.
the
I mean,
one.
that's just a quote fest. It's like so many little one-liners, like "Hail to the King, baby" and "Groovy" and all that.
A
Um,
Tales of the King baby. I forgot about
yeah,
that.
Evil Dead One is intended to be like legit scary, and
Yeah.
then two is supposed to be kind of a combination of scary and funny, and then three, which is Army of Darkness, went like all funny. And then
Yeah.
they remade it in 2013, and that was like I would say it was intended. There's nothing funny about it. It's intended to be scary, but like I feel like they've done the whole zombies in the woods thing so many times at this point that it felt a little overdone.
Mm-hmm.
The new
Mm-hmm.
one that came out as of the time we're recording this year was that was legit. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say I was terrified or anything. It takes a lot. I watch a lot of these things, but I could see like an average person getting pretty scared watching Evil Dead Rise. So
Yeah. I have no interest in that. I'm
yeah.
not.
Did you see the
Mm-mm.
commercial? Like, do you at least know like okay, so Evil Dead Rise is about it's like a mom and her three kids in an apartment and there's an earthquake and one of the kids, is like in the parking garage of the apartment complex and he sees like a hole in the ground and he looks in and oh, there's a book. So, we pull the book out and madness ensues. But what makes it terrifying is that these kids are stuck in an apartment with the mom who becomes like the deadite. And this is not like Army
Oh.
of Darkness deadite where it's comedy. This is like legit, like she is absolutely trying to kill them. Like, and when you're like a little kid and it's your mom, it's a whole thing.
Yeah. That sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
It reminds
It's
me. Sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say it. I mean, if I was somebody who had like less of a tolerance for this thing, it absolutely would be. Yeah.
It reminds me of Shaun of the Dead. Like, do you remember the
Mhm.
scene where they're driving in the car and they picked up his mom and her husband, and he's always had this love hate relationship with the his stepfather. But they've rescued both of them because the zombie apocalypse has happened, and they're driving in the car, and he turns like he's been bitten, and suddenly six people are in this sedan and the stepfather has become a zombie and he's looking around at lunch essentially and they're just very slowly realizing that the threat is inside the building
Yeah.
and oh my god, yeah, that's what it reminds me of.
Mm. So that's what I've been binging. I'm speaking of Ash versus Evil Dead. I'm trying to get Kate to watch Chucky, so that
It,
hopefully one of the next few episodes of this show will be that. But yeah,
so actually that's a good segue into what the premise of this show is, right? So we're going to start every episode with what are you currently binging. um, but the idea of the show is to talk about one season of one show and really dig into what was good, what was bad, what we hated. So the first show that we're going to do is Lois and Clark season one. And the reason we're doing that, even though it came out 20, 30 years ago now, I don't want to think about it.
whenever
They,
1993 to 1996 happened to be, right?
I think that's 30
Maybe
years.
97.
19, yeah, anyway. So we talked about Lois and Clark extensively. We talked about superheroes a lot on Other People's Business,
Yeah.
but we talked about Lois and Clark extensively on Other People's Business. And so we thought it was just fitting that the first show that we talk about in this show is going to be Lois and Clark season one.
Yeah.
And so Vinnie and I did a solid for all of you listeners. We watched every single episode together, him on his couch, me on my couch, texting each other the eye rolls and the oh my gods and the, the laugh out louds unintentionally or not. And so yeah, that is the premise of this show. So do you want to tell us, Vinny, your thoughts on Lois and Clark season 1?
Sure. Let me give just a little background on the show first, because I think it comes in handy when you're putting the show into a context. In the 1980s, DC Comics rebooted the Superman comics. That means like anything that happened before 1986 was cleared off the slate. We were remaking it. So the ship comes down from Krypton again. We reintroduce all the characters, all of that. They wanted it to be more grounded in reality, so a little bit more sci-fi based. And they wanted it to like kind of appeal to people more at that time. So if you think about like a Gen X 1986 younger millennial audience, the parents became a much bigger deal. Like if you think about pre 1986 Superman, like any movie you've seen, the first thing they do when Superman grows up is kill off either both parents or just the dad and then maybe the mom later. But the parents really became like a big deal in the Superman comics in the late 80s and early 90s. And then the other thing they did was bring the bullpen of the Daily Planet to more of a forefront. So it used to just be kind of Lois and Clark. Now it was Lois, Clark, Cat Grant, Ron Troop, Steve Lombard, all these people who kind of came together and made a camaraderie so that Clark Kent could be a more three-dimensional character. He could have people to talk to that wasn't just Jimmy Olsen, like the high school geeky kid. And then because Clark was more of a three-dimensional character, they wanted him to have a romance. And so they had this romance that they made between him and Lois Lane, and it culminated in Superman number 50, where Clark Kent asks Lois to marry him. She says yes, and that's when Warner Brothers comes knocking on the door and is like, hold up, you can't do that. And they're like, what do you mean we can't do that? They're like, well,
wait,
you can't marry them. We are actually planning on making a TV show where Lois and Clark are going to have a romance, and it's going to culminate in like them getting married. And we don't want you to do it first. So you have to stop whatever you're planning here. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. We've been planning this for years. Like this has been like a thing that we've been building towards, and we just got them engaged, and that's out on the newsstand. Like people can buy it right now. We swear to God, they're engaged. And they're like, well, hold on, just wait. And they're like, well, what do you mean just wait? Like, how long do we have to wait for them to get married on your show? You haven't even started yet. They're like, well, it'll be a few years. So what they decided to do was kill him. And that gave them time to stall. So the death of Superman happens, I think, November 1992 or so. And he stays dead long enough to give the TV show an opportunity to start. And because the national media picks this up, like, hold up, Superman is dead, it brings Superman comic book sales through the sun, which gives Lois and Clark the opportunity to start at like a newfound popularity for the character. So they took pretty much everything from that comic book that I just said, like the Daily Planet bullpen, the romance between Lois and Clark, the relationship with the parents, even certain characters that they introduced, like Cat Grant and whatnot. And the other big change that the comic books made prior to 1986, Lex Luthor was just a mad scientist because he was introduced in the 1940s, post-atomic bomb. And Lex Luthor has always been kind of this flexible character that can be whatever you need him to be. Like in the 80s, he became this billionaire philanthropist, CEO type who was actually, evil behind the scenes, but people didn't know. If you think about Smallville, when you have a teen show, what's the scariest thing you can imagine? It's the best friend that stabs you in the back and steals your girlfriend. In 2000, not that we want to get super political here, Lex Luthor becomes president of the United States when George W. Bush becomes president of the United States. So there's always that history there. So yes, that's kind of the background of that show.
I have so many freaking questions.
Go ahead.
First of all, the comic book industry, I thought, was a power unto itself. Does Warner Brothers own DC?
Yeah.
Well, all right. I had no idea.
Yeah.
But that makes All right. Well, because I'm like, how are they allowed to just tell them
Right?
not to
Yeah,
do it?
like, sorry. TV is more important than comic books, so we're just gonna knock
Yeah.
on your door. No, no, no. But yeah, that's what they did. For better or worse. I mean, we got the maybe the biggest story of the 1990s to come out of Superman comics. I mean, it took Superman from a character who was not, he's always around, people like him, but nobody's like really engaging with Superman. Then
Yeah. He's
suddenly
kind of
he
boring.
dies. Yeah, suddenly he dies, and it jumps that popularity up. Like I think they sold millions of copies at that point.
So
They were printing money.
what was who was the main character in the storyline of the comics if Superman is dead? Like, what
Okay,
is?
so there was a brief period there where they did like a funeral story arc, like everybody's reacting to his death, and the world is getting on without him. And then they actually stopped printing the books for a little while. I would say probably a half a year. I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it was just long enough that people are still engaged, but not the next week, let's say.
Sure.
Then what they did was they introduced four characters who were going to kind of take the mantle of Superman. It was Superboy, Steel, um, the Eradicator, and Cyborg Superman. And the idea was each of these four were like the one that could be the person to replace Superman. And some of them, like two of them, the Eradicator and Cyborg Superman, looked identical to Superman in many respects. And so people were like, which one is the real Superman? And it wound up being none of them. But it was this big story arc that lasted, I want to say, like a year, where they sorted all this out. And again, it was a stall tactic, but it was a fantastic stall tactic
Amazing.
because it's a story arc that's very near and dear to my heart.
So
But
then,
yeah,
would Lois and Clark have been the juggernaut that it was? Because it was a big, big, hairy deal. I remember in the '90s when it was on, we watched it every week.
yeah.
It was must see TV. Would it have been that big of a deal if the storyline? Because as a kid watching it, I had no idea. I didn't read comics. I wasn't a comic book
Right.
kid. Which
So I would say that it probably helped it, that the younger audience that was reading the comics, because prior to that, I would say that the two biggest superhero properties in the early 90s were Batman and the X-Men. Like they had those
yeah,
Saturday morning cartoons. They were really great in the comic books. Nobody was really reading Superman, but like if you were a superhero fan, I think the whole death of Superman thing probably led you into wanting to watch Lois and Clark. If you were just the general audience that wasn't really tapped into that, I think like the fact that they cast Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, who are
oh
both
yeah,
beautiful celebrities, and it was a
easy
good
on the
show.
eyes.
I think it stood on its own 2 feet for sure. I
Yeah.
think obviously the comic book thing helped, but I think they were going for an audience that was much bigger than that.
So Cat Grant is
Cat
a
Grant.
character on the show that you and I would just send emojis back and forth, like, what is she wearing? How is
Yeah.
this appropriate office wear?
Yeah.
And the liaisons that she would have at the office and the lingerie she would pull out of her office drawers, like she was a caricature, but a really fun one. And
Yeah.
you're telling me that is a character that was from the comic books?
Yeah, they introduced her, I want to say 1986, 1987. She was one of the first characters that they did when they rebooted. She was introduced as a love interest for Clark. She was kind of a mess. Like she was an alcoholic, single mom, trying to get her life together. And Clark was just never really feeling it, which I think is, I mean, take out the alcoholic and the single mom. Clark never really like she was like sort of a love interest on Lois and Clark, but like Clark was
Yeah.
never really feeling it. Even when Clark loses his memory in this season, he has amnesia, she's coming on to him hard. He's like, wait, we weren't, right? Like,
He has always had eyes for Lois. He doesn't really
Sure.
want anybody else.
Even without
Yeah.
his memory, he's like, no, no, no. I mean, Kat was portrayed on this show in a way that she was not in any other Superman media as basically a sexual predator. I mean, there's this,
Yeah.
like there's cougar and there's sexual predator. Like, I mean, when you come on to a man who has no memory and tell him like, you don't remember us, like you are crossing a certain line that she had no qualms crossing.
No, you're
same
totally
episode,
right.
she's going to like the priest in the confessional, and
Right.
remember, like she's like, "Aren't there certain things you want to experience before you die?" You hear the Bible drop, and you just hear him tear ass out of the booth or whatever.
The
Yeah,
confessional.
yeah.
Yeah, she was one of the most fun characters on that show, but certainly problematic and certainly not believable in any way. Just super fun caricature silliness.
I mean, I wasn't in the workforce in the 1980s. I don't know what things were like then. I've heard stories, that the 80s were just like one big party. But Cat Grant, I mean, like the outfits that she would come in, they were basically like
Lingerie.
lingerie. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
looking for a word like BDSM lingerie at times, but there was like the occasional episode where she wore something like somewhat appropriate for the office. But that's me thinking today. I
But
mean,
the only time that she wore something appropriate is when she was trying to manipulate somebody into thinking she was something she wasn't.
I mean,
She,
yeah,
I
there were
mean,
times where we were watching it. We were like, this is halfway okay.
yeah, but mostly it
Yeah.
was just not okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So to continue on the cast, the perfect casting, I want to talk about was it Michael Shea as Lex Luthor? Or
yes,
sorry, not Michael Shea, John Shea. John Shea
John
as Lex
Shea,
Luthor. Yes, yes. I'm sorry, I messed that up. Um,
best Luther
Absolutely perfect.
ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Best Luther ever. And oh gosh, are we? I mean, the show is 30
Okay,
years old.
I
We
know
can
where you're
spoil,
going
right?
with this. All right, we're covering Lois and Clark season 1 right now.
Yeah, just
So
season
we're
one.
gonna assume that you saw Lois and Clark season 1, that you
Uh-huh.
saw this little thing pop up on your feed, and you're like, "Oh, they're gonna watch Lois and Clark season 1. I'll watch Lois and Clark season 1," or "I remember Lois and Clark season 1." We will
Yep.
not spoil anything beyond season 1.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's fair to discuss, the season finale. So go ahead.
Okay, so just leading up to the season finale, let's talk first about what a great Lex Luthor he was. He
Yeah.
was charming and smooth and handsome, manipulative,
Yeah.
but seemed to genuinely love Lois Lane, which,
I'm
I
not
mean,
sure.
he's
I mean, he's a
a sociopath,
sociopath, right? So you can't really love. So I think
right?
a lot of the character is pride and ego. Like I think so much of what drives him is that he used to get all the attention in, Metropolis, and now
Yeah,
Superman gets all the attention in Metropolis.
right.
And I think that carries over to Lois Lane. He always seemed to have like an interest in her, but I think it really
Well,
flares up. I don't know. I'm trying to remember the pilot if he seemed genuinely
yeah.
interested in her before
In the
Superman.
pilot episode, he did not know Lois Lane. He threw a
Mm,
big party, and she got invited, and Perry got invited, and she was still calling him Mr. Luther, and he met her
right.
for the first time at that party. And so she was enamored with his wealth and his persona and the fact that he was this wealthy industrialist, businessman in the city. But he didn't know her at all. I think he only decided to pursue her. You're right. After it became clear that Superman is the next big thing, he's replaced Lex Luthor in the minds and imaginations of the populace, and as part of that, Lois Lane is now package deal, sort of.
Well, I mean, Lois Lane is more enamored with Superman than anybody at this point. So,
Yeah.
yeah, this is the ultimate thing I can't have.
Right.
And for the
Right.
man who has everything.
Yeah. So anyway, best Lex Luthor I've ever seen. Better
Yeah,
than Gene Hackman.
sure.
Better than Michael, whatever his name was in Smallville. I mean, not that he
Shannon.
was. Yeah, not that he was allowed to be really evil. He
Yeah.
was a
Well, no,
kid.
Michael Shannon was Zod. The Man of Steel Lex
Oh,
Luthor was the guy from the Social Network. Jesse Eisenberg, I want to say.
oh my God, that was Jesse Eisenberg bald in Smallville.
Yeah, not small. Oh, you're talking about Smallville, Michael Rosenbaum.
Yes, him.
Oh, I
Michael
thought you were talking about
Rosenbaum.
Man of Steel. Sorry, there's so many of these guys. Yeah, there was Gene Hackman, Kevin Spacey, Michael
Kevin
Rosenbaum,
Spacey.
Jesse Eisenberg, and is there somebody I'm forgetting? Is there a series? I don't think so. Yeah, no.
I feel like there's got to be more.
There's probably more. I'm just drawing a blank, but yeah,
But yeah, John Shea is the best Luther I've ever seen,
absolutely.
and he was well written. He was 3-dimensional. He had feelings, I guess. He wasn't just a caricature the way that Cat Grant kind of was. And they killed him off.
Yeah.
Season finale, season 1.
Which I also think is a good move because it almost got a little too overused in I mean this is like a 23 24 episode season, like, you know, one of those vintage TV shows, and every single thing that went wrong in Metropolis, he was behind it. Like every single episode he was the driving force. And I mean, had they cut that in half, let's say, like maybe
Right.
half of the stuff was his fault, then I could see moving forward with Lex. But I think it was a good move to say, like, okay, next season, totally different. Like, we're not going to have Lex anymore. You know, it's a bold move to kill off such an amazing character on your show. But yeah,
he was the ultimate villain. Like he
yeah.
was so good at it.
Top of the world.
Yeah. I just don't see how they're gonna. And you and I have not started watching season 2 yet.
Yes, I don't know, although I have seen the rest of the show many times, so I know where it's going. But yeah, go ahead.
I just don't know how they're going to replace him as a good villain.
Well, I don't think it's spoilery to say that from here on out, I wouldn't say that there is one like unified villain. Like I think you're going to have more like
Monster of the Week.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way of calling it. I mean there are going to be some story arcs. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but yeah,
that's all right.
Yeah. But anyway, the parents. Hey, let's go to Kay Kalan and Eddie Jones. Yeah,
I loved his relationship with his parents. All of those phone calls where his parents were on the 2 mobile phones.
Yeah.
What were they called?
The wireless phones, because they weren't necessarily like cell phones. They were just
cordless.
Like cordless. Phones.
Yeah. His parents were on the 2 cordless phones in the house, and he was on the phone talking to them and like dealing with problems and like.
Yeah.
They were so adorable. I was shipping his parents so hard.
And there was a conscious effort to make them cool in the same way that like Clark became cool. Like if you think about like what Clark's parents would have been like in say like the Christopher Reeve movies or anything, they were, you know, the small town squares. Remember when Lois comes to their house in season 1 and she's like trying to explain to them what a fax machine is because like, first of all, this is when faxes were new and cool.
Yes.
She's like, you know, you put a paper in and it comes out, and they're like, no, that's okay. If you're expecting a fax, I'll feed the thing. You know, like just want to make sure we have enough paper and toner in there. You know, like there was a very clear like, no, these are okay. Like, because these are the people that Clark is going to be bouncing off of in every episode, especially before anybody else knows who he is.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I loved that so much.
And it was like I said, it was a very like Gen X, early millennial thing to kind of say like the parents are going to be more of a part of your life, you know, whereas like, I don't know, previous generations, Superman was just like good, being like, okay, they're gone. You know? Yeah.
I feel like in a lot of comic books, they use the death of friends to make their origin story extra dramatic. Like Batman's origin story always includes that robbery in the alley that ends with his parents dying or being, you know, the mugging, right?
Yeah.
And it is one of the reasons why he is so filled with darkness and his need to save Gotham versus burn it to the ground, which is another, that could have been another legitimate reaction to that experience as a kid. I feel like a lot of comic books use that trope and lean on it heavily, like too heavily sometimes, versus this well-adjusted Boy Scout who just wants to do good. I thought that was a lot less boring, because Batman, I think, can be kind of boring. Sorry, not sorry.
Certainly a one note kind of thing. Like he's not super dimensional. Yeah.
No.
I think was it Alan Moore, who is the writer of Watchmen, V for Vendetta? He once said, "I'm sick and tired of Batman stories. Like we've written everything we need to read about Batman. You know, like let's move on, try something new." Yeah,
I mean, God, someday we need to add Watchmen to this
the TV show.
to the list. Yeah, the
Yeah.
TV show, because that
Big
is a
Blue.
work of art. Big Blue. That was a work of art. I
Sure.
mean, that
Sure.
episode, that season of television. And as much as I wanted it to keep going, there was, it was perfectly
Yeah, I don't think
done.
there's going to be a season 2. I mean, if they would have done it by now, right? Yeah.
There doesn't need to be a season 2.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
it was perfect.
we're going to get into the fact that Lost is above and beyond my favorite show ever. Watchmen was done by Damon Lindelof, who was the co-runner of Lost. So
Yeah.
I was all in, and I did really love that show. Yeah. More so than I think I loved Watchmen in general. Like I was never the biggest fan of Watchmen. I liked it, both as a comic and a movie. It was fine, but I don't know. I guess I just
I was never okay. So I'm not a comic book person, but I did see the movie, which predates the TV show.
Yeah,
and the movie felt silly in many. Like, some of the costumes just looked silly. Some of the conversations were just facile. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just.
I don't know which version of the movie you watched. There's like a theatrical cut, then there's a much longer director's cut, then there's an even longer than that ultimate cut. No. And I will tell you that it gets better and better the longer it is. Is it necessarily worth watching like a 4-hour movie to get like the better version of this? Probably not, but the longer it becomes, the more faithful to the book it becomes, which I guess is what makes it better. Sense. But yeah, but even sense. Still, like you're right, like you say, like, that those comic book costumes and whatnot, they don't always translate very well to the screen, and I don't know. I think Watchmen was also kind of a story that was kind of grounded in its time. We were worried about certain political, geopolitical issues, and now, I mean, you can always say, I don't want to get super political. Maybe we'll decide on that later. But like, you can always say that these things are doomed to repeat themselves. But it was definitely a story that was very much a product of its time. But Lois and Clark, I don't even know how we went down that rabbit hole.
I don't know. We should name the show The Rabbit Hole.
The Rabbit Hole.
That probably already exists, though.
Probably.
But yeah, Lois and Clark. Overall thoughts on season 1.
Wait. We haven't even talked about like Jimmy, Perry. And I mean, you can kind of combine your thoughts on a lot of these. Like, it was a very unique thing to have Perry be like an Elvis fanatic.
I want to know who made that decision. Like, in what universe has Perry ever been a fan of Elvis?
It was just this. Yeah, because his whole thing was Great Caesar's Ghost. That's what he said all the time on the George Reeves Adventures of Superman show.
Right.
Which we should mention kind of carries the same template. That's why this is the new Adventures of Superman. The Adventures of Superman was like, something goes wrong. Maybe Superman shows up and fails, maybe not. Lois and Clark, as reporters, investigate what's going on. As soon as they figure out, like, the answer to this whole like puzzle, Clark makes like a weird excuse, bounces out. Superman comes in and saves the day right at the end there. And the beauty of that is that you get that character reaction between Lois and Clark, and you don't have to pay too much of a special effects budget for the sake of like Superman only showing up for like the last few minutes or so. This is that show with, more romance.
Yeah. So I want to talk to the writer from the writer's room who decided to make Perry an Elvis fan, because that was such a fun detail. It was unexpected and a little silly, but what's the name of the Lane Smith?
Lane Smith. I'd love it if it was his idea. Like,
oh my God.
Like, instead of saying Great Shades of Ghost or Great Caesar's Ghost, and this is where I was going with it. I know at some point really early on, and it could have been the pilot, it could have been one of those first couple episodes, he does say Great Shades of Elvis. And I wonder if that was just his idea. I would love it if it was. Like,
Same. He is also a national treasure, Lane Smith. I think he's amazing. And I thought he was fantastic and hilarious on this show.
Yeah.
And I just love the fact that the character loved Elvis. It was such a fun detail. Jimmy, on the other hand, was such a wasted character.
Okay.
I was really disappointed that they didn't do more with Jimmy. And I'm not sure they could have, but I'm
Well,
not
I
sure.
mean, Jimmy's going to have a greater role going forward. I mean, it's interesting you say that.
All
There's
right.
going to be a gutting of this show come season 2. Deborah Joy Levine, who was the showrunner, is going to be fired. The entire writing team is going to be fired. And with
Mhm.
them, Cat Grant, Jimmy, and Jack are all fired as well. And obviously, John Shea, who plays Lex Luthor, died in the season finale, so he's gone as well. So if you think about that, that is like half the cast, all the writers and the showrunner gone. Um, so yeah, Jimmy is
Jesus.
going to be one of those casualties. Now Jimmy is going to be recast with Justin Whalen, so you'll get a different Jimmy next season. But yeah,
All right.
yeah, I mean it was a wasted opportunity in a lot of ways. Like I think was it Landis? I think his name was. I'd like to pull this up. Hold on. Yeah, Michael Landis was Jimmy in the first season, and he had some
Mhm.
charisma. I think the reason they decided to fire him come season 2 was that they felt like he was too similar in look to Dean Cain.
Hmm.
Um, they both had those like the dark hair and I don't know. Like I can look at Michael Landis and Dean Cain and say A and B and know the difference, but I guess they felt he was a little too similar.
Yeah, I didn't think that they looked alike at all. I mean,
Yeah.
they have the same color hair. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, especially when you think about the fact that like every opportunity they get on this show, they're like, "Hey, did you know that Dean Cain is an athlete?" Because like almost every episode, like the cold openings where he's like playing baseball with himself and he's fast enough to play every position, or he's playing basketball, and it's probably the same thing. I'm sure there was one where he was doing football. It was basically like the Bo nose of the era. I don't know.
Yeah, no, totally. What about the at least every other episode, the required shirtless scene
Sure.
where Dean Cain is like
Hey, did
just
you know that Dean Cain is an athlete?
did you know that he's got some abs going
Yeah.
on? Where's your mom, kids? She needs to come watch the show with you.
Cat
Like,
Grant coins the phrase "God in a cape," and I think it applies.
got in a cape. I love it.
Yeah.
Overall, good
I,
show.
and we
Fun.
didn't really talk much about Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, but they were perfect. They had amazing chemistry.
Yeah,
I
they
love
really
Dean Cain to
did.
death. Like if you tell me, close your eyes, Superman, Dean Cain is what comes up in my head. And I think that's a product of how old I was when this came out. I think I was like
Yeah.
approximately 10. Um, James Bond, Batman, and Superman are always going to be the person to you that they were when you were like 10, 12 years old. But Dean Cain was just
Yeah.
awesome. And I loved him so much. I got to meet him at Comic Con, and he was one of those few people that genuinely felt like he was more excited to meet me as his fan than I
Oh,
was to meet him. And believe me, I was excited to meet him. So yeah, it was very
that's so
cool.
nice.
Yeah,
Oh, very
yeah,
cool.
very cool. So I
Nice.
guess
Right.
some final thoughts on season 1. Did you have any particular favorite episodes, ones that you rolled your eyes at, anything like that?
No, I don't remember anything standing out that I loved or hated. I thought I really am gonna miss Kat. I'm really
Yeah,
bummed that she was part of that gutting because she added an element of zaniness that I think the show needed to balance
yeah,
how serious. I mean, Lois takes everything too seriously, including herself.
yeah,
Let's be real.
yeah.
And I think
Well,
that
one of
Kat was
the
really
reasons that we started watching this show, one of us, I think I called Lois Lane a lunatic or something
you
like that, and you
did.
were like, "What?" So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the
like
reason.
we're gonna get more of. I mean, there were moments certainly where Lois was kind of a lunatic in season 1, but if you talk about some of that silliness, Lois is going to be a little bit more of a lunatic come season 2.
All right, I
Yeah,
like it.
I think my favorite episode from season 1 was the meteor, the one we mentioned it before where Clark gets the amnesia and
Yes.
everything. Um, I just really loved it because I think like it added a certain amount of, first of all, some humor to it. Like Clark is like, why do I have Superman costumes in my my closet? Like, but it
Which begs the question: really, Clark?
Yeah,
That's where
really.
you keep your. That's where you keep your.
Right? Like there was, I think this season there was an episode where his apartment gets robbed by Jack, and I was just like, this is why we don't do that. Like, this is why we don't keep the orb that has all the collected knowledge of Krypton in our sock closet drawer or whatever it was. Like,
Seriously, but also, you're never going to sufficiently explain to me how he can be standing in street clothes and 2 seconds later be in his Superman costume 10 blocks away. Like, where does he change? Like,
oh, well, he's
where does
fast enough that he can just like, the Superman outfit is on underneath the clothing.
Not
so
always.
it's just ripping off like the suit and everything,
No, it's not.
because you gotta have that iconic like moving the
Right.
tie and opening
Everyone's
up.
in a while it is on underneath,
Yeah.
but not always. So I'm sorry, you're not going to win that argument yet.
Maybe we'll see one in a future season. They'll make it a little bit more clear. I don't know.
I would love that.
I can tell you that one of my favorite things about this entire series, and I won't give anything away, but my favorite episode ever, I think, is in season 2. It's when we're first introduced to H.G. Wells as a character. That is the episode where they give the whole, why can Superman be standing in front of Lois Lane as Clark and Superman and she not like, put it together. They do a beautiful job of doing that in season 2, of explaining or giving an explanation for that. And I just loved it. And I think
I can't wait.
Yeah. And that's one of those things that I love about this show is that it was a superhero show, but they weren't afraid to like lean into emotion. So that was one of the things I loved about the Meteor episode, was that at the end, Lois gives this whole like heartfelt, like, Superman is, it's everything he can do and everything he stands for. And that flood of emotions, he feels it. And then he remembers like, oh yeah. Yeah. So it never shied away from that. Maybe going forward, when it gets a little too romantic, it maybe leans too much into that and not enough into the superhero. But for now, I think it's a perfect balance. And it was one of my, up until the moment, we'll call it September 20-something, 2004, when Lost premiered, this was my favorite show of all time. So we'll call it a close second now. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we wrap up.
Yeah. Do you have any final recommendations? Would you recommend Lois and Clark season 1? Yeah. All right. And obviously I would as well. Listeners out there, you should join us. You should check out Lois and Clark seasons 1 and 2. I'm not necessarily saying that the next episode of this show will be Lois and Clark season 2, but we will get to that at some point soon.
And when you find this episode, if you disagree with anything that we've had to say, put us on blast. Let us know in the comments. We want to know.
Yeah, write in and let us know. This is one of our early shows here, so let us know shows that you love, that you want us to check out. And
what should we watch?
If we're interested enough in it, we'll definitely check them out.
100%. All right. Until next time. Later.